Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. President Biden trying to tear down roadblocks in Congress to pass his $2 trillion infrastructure package. The president saying the country can't afford to wait any longer, that it is time to raise corporate taxes to pay for the American Jobs Plan.
It's honest, it's fair, it's fiscally responsible, and it pays for what we need. I'm not trying to punish anybody. I'm sick and tired of ordinary people being fleeced.
We're also tracking the coronavirus surge in Michigan, where cases are up nearly 240% in the last month. The challenge there now, vaccinating the younger people, driving that spike. And over in Minneapolis, Derek Chauvin's murder trial wrapping up its 8th day. An expert from the LAPD testifying that Chauvin's use of force on George Floyd was not reasonable.
Sir, do you have an opinion to a degree of reasonable and professional certainty to how much force was reasonable for the defendant to use on Mr. Floyd after Mr. Floyd was handcuffed, placed in the prone position, and not resisting?
Yes.
What is that opinion?
My opinion was that no force should have been used once he was in that position.
All right, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Shaquille Brewster. He is covering the trial in Minneapolis. Shaq, let's start with Sergeant Jody Steiger, wrapping up 2 days of testimony, a standout expert witness for the prosecution so far. What else did he have to say today?
That's right, Allison. One of the few expert witnesses that we've heard from to date. You know, the past couple of days we've been hearing from Minneapolis Police Department officers, active officers, some retired, but we are hearing their aspect and their perspective on the training received. Well, this is an expert witness who reviewed the body camera video, reviewed some of the evidence, and part of his review drew that conclusion. And you heard him say it there in the video that you just played, that he concluded the force used by Derek Chauvin was excessive. He put that into legal terms, saying that it was not objectively reasonable. I want you to listen to a little bit of some of the exchange that we heard inside the courtroom earlier today during his testimony.
Through subsequent investigation that you've done, did you learn the approximate weight of the defendant around this time period?
Yes, sir.
And what was that weight?
Approximately 140 pounds.
Based on your experience as a peace officer, are you able to estimate the approximate weight of the equipment that the defendant is wearing in this photograph?
Approximately 30 to 40 pounds.
And Allison, I jumped ahead a little bit. That was actually Agent Reyerson, one of the agents who went in and investigated after the situation, after George Floyd was off in the ambulance, and helped protect and control the crime scene. I think what you can hear and discern from both Agent Reyerson, who you just heard from in that soundbite, and from Sergeant Steyer, who you asked me about initially, is that the prosecution is continuing to lay out their case that, one, the use of force that they believe Derek Chauvin used on that day was excessive, but then, two, that they're upholding the integrity of the investigation afterwards, saying that, look, this is an officer who had all of the, you saw the picture there, he had all of this weight on him when he kneeled on George Floyd. We heard that agent go on to say that the evidence was well protected afterwards. So you're really getting a sense that this prosecution is trying to do what they can to make sure they hit all of their points as they lay out the case against Derek Chauvin. Allison.
Shaq, looking ahead from today, we are expecting the medical examiner to testify this week. Floyd family attorney Benjamin Crump previewing that testimony today. What did he say?
That's right. We're looking ahead to the medical examiner's testimony. And the key reason, the reason why we're why it's so highly anticipated is because the medical examiner will list the cause of death and the manner of death. Now, we already know the medical examiner has ruled that this death is a homicide. He said, though, that the cause was more because of essentially heart stoppage as he was being restrained and interacting with officers. That's me putting it in layman's terms and trying to avoid saying cardiopulmonary, though I just said it. But, you know, we're going to hear from the medical examiner in terms of the cause and manner of death right there. But you're getting a sense from the family attorney that that testimony is going to be something they're watching very closely. I want you to listen to a little bit of what we heard from Benjamin Crump today when he was talking to my colleague, Gabe Gutierrez.
We anticipate that the medical testimony is going to be consistent with what we see with our own eyes is going to be consistent with the findings of the medical examiner's autopsy. It was an overdose of excessive force, an overdose of a knee on George Floyd's neck.
You heard him use the word overdose there. That is rebuttal to what you'll likely hear from the defense and during the cross-examination of Andrew Baker, who is the Hennepin County medical examiner. They're going to point to the fact that that autopsy result shows that George Floyd had drugs in his system. You're going to get a sense that the prosecution is going to point to the idea that, look at the video. You see Derek Chauvin with his knee in the neck, upper back area, and that it was the oxygen deficiency, as we heard from the physician that testified earlier in this trial, that it was oxygen deficiency that really was the cause of George Floyd's death. Expect a major fight when we finally hear from the medical examiner at some point later in this process.
Yeah, Shaq, Crump's choice of words there are certainly no coincidence. Shaq Brewster in Minneapolis, thank you so much.
Right.
Michigan is shifting its vaccine strategy, prioritizing young people who are behind this latest surge of coronavirus cases. Right now, Michigan is battling the worst spike in the entire country. Average daily coronavirus cases for kids under 10 shooting up 230% since February 19th. Average cases for kids 10 to 19 nearly as bad, up 227%. That's all according to the state's health department. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson is joining me now from Ford Field in Detroit, which is now a vaccination site. Priscilla, we got to talk about those stats because they are absolutely outrageous. And we're talking kids under 10. This is a group that has not been getting COVID in large numbers. What are health officials there saying about this spike?
Well, health officials are saying that that is why it's absolutely critical that young people in the state begin to get vaccinated because of those staggering numbers that you just mentioned. And to put a fine point on what exactly is happening here, 40% of the outbreaks, so the clusters where a number of people are getting sick in one area, are coming from schools and youth sports. And we know, of course, that when students leave school and leave those sporting events, they go home to families where there are sometimes older parents, older adults who live with them, live in the community. And when you have these more contagious variants out there, the virus is able to spread more quickly than it did even a year ago when this pandemic first began. And so that is the concern. It's why we saw the state open vaccine eligibility to anyone over the age of 16 this week. And officials are hoping that young people and parents will take advantage of that in order to start to bring some of those numbers down. Allison?
So, Priscilla, to that point, what are they doing to try to encourage teens and 20-somethings to get a shot?
Well, we saw the governor, Gretchen Whitmer, here at Ford Field yesterday getting her vaccine alongside her 19-year-old daughter. The state has also deployed a number of student ambassadors, and I had an opportunity to speak to some of those folks and also to speak to some moms. I spoke to a mom and principal who brought her 16-year-old son to be vaccinated, and she shared with me that her 16-year-old has two younger siblings who aren't yet eligible, one of whom has a pre-existing condition. And so it was very important to her that her son get vaccinated in order to protect his younger siblings. I also spoke to another mom, Dr. Chu, who actually vaccinated her son, and I asked both of them what their thought process was about getting their kids vaccinated. Take a listen to what they shared with me.
Right now in our state, his age group is where we are having a lot of positive cases. So I knew as soon as I was going to get the opportunity and he was next in line, I was going to sign him up because he's active in sports and school and other things. And, you know, I just want him to be safe and I want others around him to be safe as well.
Their entire life as a parent has been trying to keep their kids safe. This is one proven thing that's going to keep your kids safe from getting sick, from getting hospitalized, from missing school, from missing all the great activities that they want to do, so for missing their adolescence. So out of all the things that you could do for your kids as a parent, this is a simple, safe opportunity for them to return to some normalcy.
And one of the things that those moms really emphasized to me is that for students and teenagers under the age of 18, they are going to require that parent consent. And so it really is incumbent upon the parents to have these conversations with their kids and sort of talk about any sort of hesitancy and decide if this is the best decision for them. Allison?
Priscilla, I know equity is also an issue there in Michigan. I mean, that Ford Field site was initially set up to focus on low-income and minority residents in Detroit, but you've been reporting that the majority of people getting vaccinated there are white. What is going on?
Exactly. So the governor here has said that vaccinations are going to be key in containing the spread of this virus. And of course, reaching the communities most impacted is a big part of that. But here we have Ford Field, which is in the city of Detroit, a city of that is nearly 80% black, but only 9.5% of the vaccines given here at Ford Field have gone into the arms of black patients. And so what we're seeing is the city, state, and even the federal government looking at deploying mobile sites, opening up, relying on community clinics and local pharmacies, and opening up different sites, walk-up sites and things like that to really reach these communities. And even now reports that officials are going to start going door to door, trying to reach these folks and get them vaccinated in order to shore up those disparities and make sure no community is left behind in this vaccine distribution. Allison?
All right, Priscilla Thompson in Detroit, thank you so much.
Thank you.
New concerns about the AstraZeneca vaccine. The European Medicines Agency now saying that there is a possible link between that vaccine and blood clots. Dr. Anand Parekh, Chief Medical Advisor at the Bipartisan Policy Center, joining me now. Dr. Parekh, UK health regulators now say adults under 30 should not take the AstraZeneca vaccine. Tell us more about their new guidance and any concerns you have here. Of course, this drug is not yet available here in the U.S., but your concerns about what's going on overseas.
Sure, Allison. So the European Medicines Agency looked at 25 million citizens in the EU and found 86 cases of blood clots in the brain as well as the abdomen. And that has led them to issue this warning. It's really, they also say that it's an extremely rare side effect. They still say, importantly, Allison, that the benefits of the vaccine significantly outweigh the risks. The WHO also has said that though this is plausible, they don't think it is confirmed as of yet. So I think the research and the investigation, Allison, is still ongoing. The critical point for the American public is we don't quite know yet whether this vaccine will be utilized in this country. But you can bet that once the manufacturer submits an application for emergency use authorization, the FDA here in the U.S. is going to look at this very, very closely.
Let's talk about this from the U.S. perspective. As you mentioned, the FDA has not reviewed AstraZeneca's COVID vaccine for emergency use yet, but you say it will look at this very closely. Could a report like this diminish this vaccine's chances here in the U.S.?
I think the FDA, as well as its independent advisory committee, Allison, are going to look at all of the data. So they're going to look at the data from the European Medicines Agency. They're going to look at what other countries are doing. And frankly, other countries are acting in different ways. Some are restricting the vaccine for certain populations. So I think the FDA is going to look at this very closely. We already do in this country have 3 FDA-approved vaccines. By the end of May, the administration has said that we're already just from those 3 vaccines going to have enough supply for the entire American population. So again, it's unclear whether this vaccine will be utilized here in the United States, but we'll just have to wait and see until, again, the manufacturer submits its application to the FDA.
5 states now account for more than 40% of the new COVID cases that we are seeing here in the U.S. New York, Michigan, Florida, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. But the government's still distributing vaccines based on population, not necessarily cases. Here's White House senior advisor Andy Slavitt on that.
We have a long way to go today to get the country to a place where each of our states has reached the number of vaccinations that the population can handle. So by and large today, we are still, not entirely, but by and large, we are still allocating vaccines based upon population until we get to that point. Clearly, we will get to a place where more targeted strategies will work. But right now, I would commit to you that we're doing both.
Is that the right move, or should the government be sending more vaccines to hotspot states?
Well, Allison, I'm glad that the administration is considering it. In fact, this is a specific recommendation that the Bipartisan Policy Center put out there in late January, that when the situation is warranted, that the administration and the federal government should take into account the severity of the outbreak as they allocate the vaccine. And exactly how you pointed out right now, B117 has become the dominant strain in the United States. We know it's more transmissible. It's potentially more virulent as well. So an argument can be made that certain geographical locations should be getting more vaccine. So it's good to hear at least the administration saying that is a tool in their toolbox and they would consider it.
Dr. Park, Moderna's COVID vaccine provides protection for at least 6 months. That's according to a new study from the New England Journal of Medicine. Pfizer said the same thing about its vaccine last week. Does this mean that we will likely need boosters 6 months after getting vaccinated? What is the research telling you so far?
Yeah, I think overall, Allison, it's great news. And the key point for viewers is that 6 months is a floor. We really actually don't know how long immunity will last, just because we haven't been able to study it. So we're going to have to follow that.
Right.
But most experts believe that immunity from the vaccine is going to last a lot longer. And that will ultimately dictate if and when booster shots will be required. So we'll just have to wait and see how long it takes before immunity to wane. I think it's also an important reminder that most of the science tells us that the immunity lasts longer after you get a vaccine compared to just a natural infection. So even if you've had COVID-19 in the past, it's still important to get vaccinated when your number is called.
Thank you so much for the reminder. And let's hope that is indeed the floor and that these vaccines last even longer than that. Dr. Park, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Why did he do it? Investigators trying to understand why a member of the Navy opened fire in Frederick, Maryland yesterday. NBC News correspondent Tom Costello reports.
Hey, Allison, good day to you. So this happened in Frederick, Maryland, about an hour or so northwest of Washington, D.C., and it ended at Fort Detrick, which is a military base where they do biological research. The suspect worked on that base. We don't know what his motive was, and we don't know if he specifically targeted his two victims. It happened during the morning rush hour.
We have a male subject in an army-type suit with an AR-15.
Shots fired at an office park in Frederick, Maryland. Two Navy sailors wounded, one of them critically, in an attack at an unmarked military office.
Gunshot wound to the chest.
The suspected shooter identified by authorities as 38-year-old Fantahun Wodasenbet, also an active duty sailor, who sped off before police arrived.
Suspect vehicle, black Nissan with Virginia tags.
Within minutes, the suspect was at the gate to Fort Detrick, about 5 miles away, where he breached the checkpoint, making it about half a mile onto base, with police in hot pursuit. Eventually, law enforcement shooting and killing Wodasenbet after he pulled out a weapon, his vehicle riddled with bullet holes.
Did exit the vehicle, and that's when our officers were able to neutralize the subject and prevent further loss of life.
Surveillance video from a nearby business shows one of the victims entering and seeking help moments after the shooting. The Navy says Wodasenbet was a hospital corpsman assigned to Fort Detrick since August of 2019, with previous awards for good conduct and marksmanship. But investigators aren't sure whether he knew the two victims or why he went to the off-base Navy office. The commanding general says they were already in the process of reviewing base security procedures.
In light of what's happened, certainly across the country, we were about as well prepared for it as we could.
Now the FBI, local, state, and military police are combing through the evidence at a scene that looks all too familiar.
Today it happened in Frederick. A week or so ago it happened in Boulder. We always hope that we don't get that call. Today we got that call. Tomorrow it could be another agency.
One of the victims was treated and released from the hospital, released late yesterday. The other one, we believe, at last report, still in critical condition at the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Unit up in Baltimore. Allison, back to you.
Let's check in with NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. Starting with the latest on travel this hour, international travel dropped 89% in February compared to the same time last year. That's according to the Director General of the International Air Transport Association, who added there's no sign of recovery yet, given the current circumstances. And the International Monetary Fund is backing President Biden's plan to raise corporate income tax and set a global minimum tax. The president's plan aims to prevent international companies from seeking low tax havens by establishing a global minimum. G20 finance officials will review his plan today. And a district attorney in Atlanta won't prosecute State Representative Park Cannon. She's the Georgia lawmaker arrested after knocking on the door of Governor Kemp in protest of the state's controversial new voting laws. The DA said in an email, quote, "After reviewing all of the evidence, I have decided to close this matter." Well, Osaka is moving the Olympic torch relay off public roads. The governor is declaring a COVID-19 emergency following a record number of coronavirus infections. Japanese officials are worried a highly contagious mutant strain is spurring a fourth wave of the virus with just 107 days left before the Olympics. And UPS is buying electric aircraft to speed up delivery time in certain areas. Now, the company agreed to buy 10 vertical takeoff and landing aircrafts that reach top speeds of 170 miles per hour and have a 1,400-pound cargo capacity. While not self-driving yet, they are designed to be someday. Allison, with all the packages that we have been buying as we've been spending so much time at home, I don't know anybody who wouldn't love to see some faster delivery times, as gross and indulgent as that might be.
Simone, they should just put one of those right over my house and just keep dropping things onto my front porch, because that's basically how it goes around here.
Seriously.
President Biden says he's ready and willing to compromise to pass his $2 trillion infrastructure and jobs proposal.
In the next few weeks, the Vice President and I will be meeting with Republicans and Democrats to hear from everyone. And we'll be listening. We'll be open to good ideas and good faith negotiations. But here's what we won't be open to. We will not be open to doing nothing. Inaction simply is not an option.
NBC News White House correspondent Carol Lee joining me now. Carol, the president saying also that partisan issues should not stop his infrastructure plan. Here he is again.
Whatever partisan divisions there are around other issues, there don't have to be around this one. The divisions of the moment shouldn't stop us from doing the right thing for the future. These aren't Republican bridges, Democratic airports, Republican hospitals, or Democratic power grid. Think of the Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highway system, or the space race. We're one nation, united and connected.
All right, Carol, so we've heard from the president twice there saying partisan issues shouldn't get in the way. He's willing to compromise. What issues in his plan are causing the most friction right now and might be the toughest places to find compromise?
I think there's three of those, Allison. I mean, there's the overall size of the package, the cost, over $2 trillion. For many Republicans in particular, it's just a non-starter to spend that much money in one single bill once again. And then if you dive into, and related to that is just what's in the bill, there are certain provisions that for Republicans and maybe some Democrats also are a little bit of a stretch from infrastructure. Those are things like money for housing, money for electrical plugging things to plug in electrical vehicles, and money for $400 billion for what the White House is calling home and community-based care for the elderly, people who are aging or disabled, something that a lot of Americans have to deal with. But once again, some lawmakers say that has nothing to do with actual infrastructure. And then the third thing would just be how to pay for this. I mean, you've seen the president put forward a plan that raises taxes on corporations, also a non-starter for many Republicans. And even some Democrats are saying the president's plan, which would take the corporate tax rate from 21 to 28%, is just a little too high. For senators like Joe Manchin of West Virginia, for instance, a Democrat, says he would be okay with 25%, but not going all the way to 28%. So there's that kind of gives you the parameters in which all of this debate is going to happen. It's how to pay for it, what the size is, and what people's definition of infrastructure is.
We know the price tag is part of the problem, right? Republicans just don't like the $2 trillion price tag. You're talking about issues with covering that cost. Today, the president really broke down his plans on that, getting into more detail. You talk about the corporate tax rate. What else did we learn there?
Yeah, he dove into the corporate tax rate, what his thinking is on that, and also not apologizing for it, saying, look, corporations, they're going to benefit from this. There's a number of corporations that rely on good ports, good roads, good bridges, all of these things, and workers to have the stability to be able to go to work. That's where the idea of this home care or community-based care comes from. And so he said that there's, the corporations can do their part, and also signaled, there's another plan that he's going to be putting forward in the coming weeks. And he said that that's where they'll get into people's personal income taxes, that another option for paying for some of this stuff that he wants to do, that he says will create jobs, is to raise taxes on Americans who make more than $400,000 a year. So he outlined and talked about that today. At the same time, one of the things that was notable, Allison, that he said is that he's willing to compromise on this stuff. And so when you have a Democratic senator and they can't afford to lose any, saying, look, your 28% tax rate for corporations is too high for me, the president's kind of forced into a corner and has to negotiate. But he said today that he would be willing to compromise on that number and other things.
Carol, let's talk about the timeline here. The president wants Congress to pass his plan soon. Is the White House goal still Memorial Day?
Yeah, quite ambitious. They still would like to get something passed by Memorial Day. But, this is a really heavy lift. I mean, anyone who thought that the COVID relief bill and the machinations over that dragged on for a while, I mean, get out the popcorn, take a nap, do whatever you need to do, because this is going to take some time. And while they may say that Memorial Day is the deadline, there's a lot of folks in Washington who think that's somewhat unrealistic, given how far apart not just the White House and Republicans are, but the White House and some Democrats are. And they really can't afford to lose many, maybe a couple in the House, but not any in the Senate. So while they've set that very ambitious deadline, that's expected to slip, as most things do in Washington.
Carol, one last question for you, too, because here at News Now, we are modestly obsessed with the guy who sits out on the street behind you with his boombox playing music. I feel like I'm hearing a little Bob Marley there. Is that him again?
Yeah, little reggae. Yeah, little evening reggae over here at the Hay Adams.
We are huge fans of the serenading he provides for you guys on the regular. Thank you so much, Carol.
Thanks, Allison.
President Biden taking heat for combining several issues into a single jobs bill. NBC News senior political analyst John Allen writing, the president threw everything, including the kitchen sink, into his $2 trillion plus infrastructure proposal. But that's not unusual. It's how Washington makes laws. John joins me now. All right, John, you say the kitchen sink nature of this bill, more than individual policy, has become a main point of friction here. But if it's not unusual to do that in Washington, why is it causing such a big stir?
One of the reasons, Allison, is that it's very easy to unify the opposition party, in this case the Republicans, based on process, based on items outside the substance of the bill. So if Republicans say Democrats are bending the process rules, it's easy to get their members to vote against it without actually even having to concentrate on whether they want to put extra money into roads and bridges and broadband and some of the other items that Carol just mentioned.
So, John, you also write that an omnibus bill like this is arguably the most effective way to enact significant legislation in the modern era, and that there are plenty of examples of both parties having stapled policies together when they have the power and the political capital to do it. Let's talk more about why this is so effective and hit us with some of those examples.
Sure, Allison. One of the reasons that this is effective, and it's sort of a necessity of the modern Congress, and really if you talk to some folks who are familiar with the process, they would say going back all the way to the post-World War II era, this is how things have been done. And it's because very few pieces of legislation actually make it through, especially significant bills. Very few of them get signed into law by a president. So if you want to get something done as a president or a majority party in Congress, if you want to get your agenda together, you often have to try to put things that you want to do that are less popular on top of things that are popular in hopes that the whole thing will make it to the president's desk. So knowing that they don't have a lot of windows of opportunity, they take whatever the must-pass legislation is, whatever the big piece of the pie is, and start tacking things onto it. And that's, for time immemorial, at least for those of us who've been covering Congress for many years. The most recent example I can think of is President Donald Trump, right before he left office, signed an appropriations law that smacked together spending for all of the different departments of government into one piece of legislation. That's supposed to be, in theory, 12 or 13 different bills in a given year. But what we've seen over the years is this omnibus legislating. In fact, sometimes it's the smaller provisions, or what are thought to be the smaller provisions, that end up being big. I'm sure you've heard of COBRA, the health insurance extension that you get if you find yourself displaced from work,
sure.
That you can buy into very expensively. But that term COBRA is the Combined Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1986. And it was the 9th or 10th title in that bill. It was a humongous piece of legislation. So, there are any number of examples of this over time. And again, it's really the way Congress operates these days.
John, I always learn something when you're on. I was very familiar with that very overpriced COBRA option that I never, ever, ever have taken before. I never knew what it stood for. Very cool.
And actually,
so
I got it wrong. I said combined.
What?
I said combined omnibus budget reconciliation. It's actually consolidated omnibus budget reconciliation act. I used the wrong word.
Combined, consolidated, either one works, because I didn't even know that's what it stood for. So that is very cool. And I bet most of our viewers didn't either. So just always, as I said, learn something with you. So let me ask you one last question then. What is the danger for President Biden here of pulling this all together, of this kitchen sink approach?
I mean, the biggest problem is that each of the individual pieces of it don't get as much scrutiny as they would if they were individual bills, where you had members of Congress working through them on committees for months and months, and sometimes over the course of 2, 4, 6, 8 years, as lots of major legislation takes. So if you slap it all together in one bill, you can end up with waste, fraud, and abuse. You can end up with programs that don't work the way that they're designed or envisioned to work in the first place. And so, that always the backlash risk is that a year from now, people will look back and say, you really made a mistake in this piece of the legislation or that piece of the legislation.
Yeah. John Allen, always great to see you, and great to see that jersey. What a win last night. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Go baseball.
Go baseball. This week, NBC News is featuring American workers whose jobs and lives have been transformed by the pandemic. Today, we go inside an Amazon fulfillment center to see what could be the blue-collar job of the future, the warehouse worker. Here's NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Ruhle.
Allison, this week we could be getting the results on a vote to possibly unionize one single Amazon facility down in Bessemer, Alabama. And you might ask, why is everyone focused on one single place? Well, because of this last year, supercharged by the pandemic, Amazon and other major retailers have been hiring millions and millions of warehouse workers so they can deliver goods to you and I quickly. And so over the last year, we have seen manual labor, service workers, people from all sorts of other industries shifting into this warehouse work, which offers steady pay, steady schedules, and could be the blue-collar job of the future. Take a look. Drive down the New Jersey Turnpike and you'll see the future of work for many Americans. Jobs in warehouses like this one for Amazon.
We pick out the items that are ready to be shipped out for the customers that have ordered.
Like hundreds of thousands of others, Carlos Linares started last summer after he was laid off from his hotel job because of the pandemic.
Do you consider this a short-term job?
At first, it was going to be a short-term job, but I had realized that I could actually have growth here.
Enli Gramajo lost her job at a restaurant. A year later, she's a robotics tech.
I used to work 6 days, so I always was on my feet.
If your old job called you today and said, come back, would you go back?
I wouldn't. No.
As a result of the pandemic, Americans stayed home and online shopping surged to more than 20% of retail sales.
During the pandemic, were you supercharging your hiring or was it on pace?
With that increased customer demand, we were able to be a job provider.
Jobs in warehouse centers grew by 10% last year.
Amazon and companies like it employ millions of people in facilities like this across the country, and they're hiring more every day.
In places like Riverside, California, Dallas, and Chicago, but also Atlanta, Columbus, and Phoenix, cities close to major highways, railroads, and ports.
They employ a whole lot of people, and they pay a whole lot in taxes. So from an economic standpoint, they've been tremendous.
And even as these e-commerce warehouses become more automated, it doesn't mean fewer jobs.
It means that workers are having to speed up the pace at which they're working, their productivity levels. And this is where we run into problems with health and safety.
And for some employees like Courtney Brown, meeting this growing demand for online shopping can take a toll.
It's getting to a point where it's just like, how much more can we do?
She's been working at an Amazon warehouse for nearly 4 years. Amazon does oppose the unionizing of workers, but they told us they prioritize the health and safety of their employees. They encourage those employees to work with management to find a path for success. The facility I was at here in New Jersey offers jobs that are 4 days a week shifts, 10 hours a day with 2 30-minute breaks. What's interesting is these are jobs you don't need college educations for. You don't need specialized training. You can come in off the street. They pay $16.50 an hour and they offer benefits. So they are drawing in people from all sorts of industries. Now, one of the main gripes, though, these are very physical jobs. Many people are saying they feel more and more pressure to produce more. And when your coworker is a robot, those robots don't get tired. So there are a lot of conversations. Do they need to have more protections for these workers? We're going to find out what happens with this union vote. If it goes through, it is going to have a ripple effect that we could see happen around the world.
An Iranian cargo ship attacked off the coast of Yemen early this morning, just as world leaders started nuclear talks in Vienna. NBC News Tehran bureau chief Ali Arouzi reports.
Hey, Alison. Well, the Iranian ship called the Saviz was attacked in the early hours of Tuesday morning while anchored off Yemen's Red Sea coast. Now, according to Iranian state media, the explosion damaged the hull of the ship after limpet mines had been attached to it, but they say the damage was minor and there were no casualties. Now, Iranian officials haven't blamed anybody yet for the blast, but they have launched an investigation and they say whoever was responsible will be held to account. Now, Iranian officials are insisting that the Saviz is a civilian cargo vessel stationed in the Red Sea to help combat piracy in the region and secure shipping lines. U.S. and Saudi analysis, however, say that the vessel is an important naval asset operated by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Now, according to the U.S. Naval Institute, a report that they released, they say uniformed men in a class of small boat used by the IRGC have been photographed on board the ship's deck. Since the ship came to the Red Sea in 2016, it's been observed holding patterns off the coast of Yemen, where Iran supports Houthi rebels against the Yemeni government and Saudi-led coalition. And Alison, most military analysts agree that the ship most likely is there for military use and functions as an offshore surveillance base using radars and other systems. And Alison, given the long-standing tensions in the region, the timing doesn't seem to be a coincidence. The blast is the latest in a series of reported attacks on Israeli or Iranian-owned cargo ships since late February in this region, for which the two sides always blame each other. The attacks usually take place during tense or sensitive moments, and yesterday was certainly one of those days, as Iran and world powers took a step closer to resolving the nuclear deal, a deal that we know Israel strongly opposes. Now, the New York Times reported that Israel had told U.S. U.S. officials it attacked the civiles. That's a report NBC News can't confirm. But interestingly, Alison, the ship had been under international sanctions until 2015 when the nuclear deal was signed. Under the Obama administration, the sanctions were removed. But when the Trump administration came to power, the sanctions were renewed on the civiles. So there may be a not so subtle message there.
Will the U.S. skip out on the 2022 Winter Olympics? Not likely, but should we? The State Department's walking back comments about considering boycotting Beijing over human rights issues in China. Here's NBC News foreign correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer.
Alison, the State Department has denied that it's consulting with allies about a joint boycott of the 2022 Beijing Olympics. However, there are growing calls for the U.S. and other countries to consider backing out of the Games because of human rights violations in China, in particular in Xinjiang. Now, the confusion came about yesterday because there was a comment by the State Department spokesperson, which was quickly clarified to say that the U.S. is always consulting on issues that are of mutual interest, and this happens to be one of them. And the Olympics are coming under scrutiny because of China's repression of the Uyghurs. These are policies that President Biden has ventured to label genocide. The U.S., the U.K., Canada, the European Union have already enacted sanctions against some Chinese officials over Xinjiang and over Hong Kong. But there's now some political disagreement in the U.S. over what further action should be taken and whether targeting the Olympics is necessarily the way to do it. Chinese officials are dead set against this. They dismiss the talk of repression as lies, and today they very firmly warned against politicizing sports. The U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee is also opposed to a boycott. They say it just punishes the athletes and does little to address the bigger issues, let alone fix them. And talk about strange times to be organizing an Olympic Games with the pandemic and international travel restrictions. Tokyo officials are hoping they'll be able to pull it off in July. But because the Summer Games were delayed by a year, we have this strange situation where the Summer and Winter Games are being organized simultaneously. The Winter Games here are due to open in Beijing on February 4th of next year. Allison?
Human rights groups say armed forces have killed dozens of children since a military coup threw Myanmar into chaos more than 2 months ago. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons has more on the crisis.
Hey there, Alison. It's now 2 months since President Biden announced sanctions against Myanmar's generals. Last month, he described the killings as outrageous, and yet they go on, and underscoring the ruthlessness of the regime there that took power, overthrowing the democratically elected government, is the killing of children. 7-year-old Chim Yu Chit was shot by a soldier in her own home. Myanmar's youngest victim of a brutal military crackdown that tonight human rights groups say is sparing no one, including an alarming number of children.
Well over 40 children who have been killed.
The 7-year-old's family say she died in her father's arms. How does a 7-year-old girl get killed by the military?
The military barged into her house. Obviously, the young girl was alarmed and ran towards her father, and one of the soldiers just shot her.
Myanmar's military holding a parade while parents cry over caskets. An 11-year-old was buried with her toys. A 1-year-old baby wounded in the eye by a rubber bullet. The ruthlessness caught on camera when this teen on a motorbike was shot in cold blood. The death toll of pro-democracy demonstrators since the coup 2 months ago, now 550. Killed by a military armed from abroad by countries including China and Russia.
These governments have blood on their hands, and the blood on their hands is from the Myanmar children.
The UN is warning of a coming bloodbath in Myanmar, but action at the UN Security Council has been blocked by both China and Russia. Alison, so far, the words of the West appear to be having little impact. Alison?
Nike is suspending its Deshaun Watson endorsement as two women accusing the Texans quarterback of sexual misconduct publicly identified themselves. Ashley Solis is the first woman to speak publicly about her claims. A second woman, Lauren Baxley, releasing a letter through her attorney. Now, 22 women, all represented by the same lawyer, have sued Watson. He hasn't been charged with any crimes, and he is denying the allegations. Yahoo Sports senior NFL reporter Charles Robinson joining me now. Charles, tough topic, but great to see you nonetheless. Ashley Solis getting really emotional while telling her story in Houston yesterday. Take a listen.
I suffer from panic attacks, anxiety, and depression. I'm in counseling as a result of Deshaun Watson's actions. I hope he knows how much pain he's inflicted on me emotionally and physically. My father, who was once a diehard Texans fan, can no longer mention his name without turning red.
All right, as we said, he hasn't been charged with any crimes. He denies the allegations, but that's just one woman of 22 who have come forward and accused him. What else can you tell us about what they are saying and you know, what kind of a situation Watson is facing right now?
Well, it's a significant change in the Deshaun Watson allegations because it adds a name and a face and a woman who is willing to stand up in a very emotional address and say, look, I'm real, I exist. And the opposing attorney's suggestion of anonymity being a problem, I'm now breaching that. And now you know who I am. You can look into my background to determine the legitimacy of who I am as a professional, which people have done with Ashley Solis. It appears she is a professional, licensed massage therapist. And, it creates a situation for not only the NFL, the Houston Texans, but I think everyone who's focused on these civil cases where the anonymity of Jane Doe's has now disappeared, and it takes it to an entirely different emotional realm. And I think that played into Nike severing its endorsement relationship with Deshaun Watson, as well as Beats by Dre, which is owned by Apple, Reliant Energy, another locally owned corporation in Houston, also severing its ties. So Deshaun Watson has begun to feel, I think, publicly now, some of his backers backing away from him.
Yeah, I mean, Charles, you bring up such a great point, right? When you talk about a group of 22 women, that's one thing. But when you see a woman there, emotional, real and raw, it really starts to, it brings the human element in here as opposed to just seeing maybe a lawsuit or a list of names even. You mentioned the endorsement situation. Nike released a statement about suspending Watson's endorsement deal, saying, we are deeply concerned by the disturbing allegations and have suspended Deshaun Watson. We will continue to closely monitor the situation. You mentioned all the other deals that he had and has no longer. What else is at stake here for him?
Well, everything's at stake right now. Not only his 2021 season, but I would tend to say his football career right now is on hold. And the NFL now, there's going to be pressure when endorsements tend to step away from players. When corporate America begins to tend to distance itself from players, it does put additional pressure on the NFL's own internal judicial process, which is different from a legal judicial process. It's different from the court of public opinion. The NFL has the latitude to set Deshaun Watson aside on the commissioner's exempt list, which is essentially paid leave, and say, look, we can't have you engaging in NFL activities until some of this is sorted out. It has appeared to be headed in that direction, but there's never been more pressure on the NFL and its investigative process than right now to do something about this. And let's not forget, the Houston Police Department also fielded a criminal complaint, has said it's doing its own investigation into Deshaun Watson. Ashley Solis, her statement that was read on Tuesday has also been given to the Houston Police Department. So in every sense, both in a civil nature, from a public relations standpoint, and then criminality and from the NFL standpoint, everything is begun to elevate to unprecedented levels in this case.
Charles, I have to ask you, right, because this is something we talk about all the time. We got some sports fans on our staff. I talk with other NFL fans, and the one thing that people say over and over again is that the NFL has not taken strong enough action when it comes to domestic violence issues, when it comes to violence or aggression against women. They really feel like the NFL has not necessarily been as strong as it should be. Do you sense that is starting to change here and that this could be a different situation? Obviously, it depends on what happens in the courts, but do you feel that this could be a turning point? Because so many of us watch and think, wow, the NFL just hasn't been strong enough.
Well, I think the NFL has definitely been a league that people perceive as being reactionary when it's come to the issue of domestic violence, which is when domestic violence occurs, then it takes the NFL some determined period of time to either make a statement or some type of actions with the eligibility of players. I think when you talk to critics of the NFL, what they will say is the NFL proactive enough? Are they progressive enough? Do they spend time with players or individuals in the league trying to prevent domestic violence rather than just reacting to domestic violence? And really, that's something that's never gone away since the Ray Rice case, which was the most, I think, high-profile domestic violence case in the NFL's history. And that and the NFL always being dogged by this idea of video proof, that the NFL stance typically changes dramatically when there's some sort of video proof or telephonic proof that's now offered to the NFL that makes a very difficult PR situation develop for the league. But again, I think this comes down to proactive versus reactive. And historically, the NFL has had a reactive stance to domestic violence.
How about Watson and his attorney? Anything new from them since these new public comments have come out? Obviously, it is one thing to deny larger allegations, but when you see a woman speaking, her truth there on national television, what are they saying about that?
Well, Rusty Hardin, who's Deshaun Watson's attorney, came out with a statement after Ashley Solis spoke at that press conference, and he identified her as a woman that, through Tony Busby, the Houston attorney who's at the center of these 22 civil suits, had sought a $100,000 settlement in the case. Interestingly enough, Rusty Hardin included email exchanges, previously confidential email exchanges between Deshaun Watson's representation and Tony Busby's law firm. Interestingly enough, in those exchanges, it appeared that there was an element in terms of Deshaun Watson's representation of being open to talking settlement. And the way it was termed was, this is not an admission of guilt, and I'm paraphrasing here, but more to teach Deshaun a lesson about, trusting certain individuals that he shouldn't trust. It's taken it to a place where it very much is Deshaun Watson's camp painting this woman as being someone who requested hush money. But when this all began and the first lawsuit was filed, and it was Ashley Solis' civil suit that was filed, Tony Busby came out and said, I did attempt to settle this, meaning the inference was there that there was an attempt to get some sort of a cash settlement out of this, which is a legal tool that lawyers have available to them. This is how this ugliness that we're sort of seeing, the exchanges between the two attorneys, has been something that's been building up.
Well, these are serious allegations, and he is a big NFL star. I know we will continue to be covering this and see what happens. Charles, always appreciate having you on.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.